And welcome to another Dave and Tiff podcast. We're into June very heartily. And you know what's great, Tiff, is that this month we've seen a lot of things starting to open up. Not only, businesses like restaurants. I'm going to tell you about, I went to a restaurant this past weekend. One of my things that I wanted to hit to do when things started to open up. But, things like sports are starting to get underway. And our guest today is going to be assistant strength and conditioning coach Josh Elms from the University of Hawaii, because Big Red athletes are able to come, student athletes are able to come back to campus. So we'll see how things are going with him. But, since this opening up a little bit, have you kind of attacked or done something that you couldn't do before?
You should have asked me this before the show started, not put me on the spot. Let me think about that during the course of the show. I haven't really put that much thought into that question. How about you?
Well, I went to a restaurant, so I did go this past Saturday, and not every restaurant is open yet. So one of the Buca di Beppo, nice plug for them, went there, and it's at the Ward Center, right? Ward Theaters, where the theaters are. So the theater is still not open. Excuse me, and the other places are still not open. I think Dave and Buster's upstairs is open, but I don't know if they're serving food. So Buca di Beppo was like, and then there's nothing. Ward Avenue and that street that goes between in front of the Ward Theaters is just dead. Ward Center is pretty dead. And here you have a Saturday night, right, where normally it's just bustling out there, but it's really dead. And I think Buca di Beppo said they just opened the day before, which was Friday, and they had a modified menu. But that was one of the things I wanted to do, was go to a restaurant, sit down, be served, and eat, and not have to take out and take it home and do all that kind of stuff. So that was really nice. And what's funny? We left, like, our reservations were at 7. We left like at 6:45, and normally we would be late. So my wife is asking me, oh, should I call and let them know we're going to be late? But I said, you know what? There's still no traffic. There's going to be lots of parking. So easy, 15 minutes in, zoom in, parking in abundance, got there, no problem. So that was great. So yeah, if you did anything over the past week or weekend since things started to open up, just wondering if you actually did something that you couldn't do, but that was a lot of fun.
Not really. Well, I mean, we do know a lot of people that work in the food and beverage industry, and especially for bartenders, a lot of their wages come from tips and not so much what they make, hourly wage or paycheck or what have you. So for them to be able to be back in some sort of capacity, to be able to serve the public, serve their friends, we know a lot of them that are out there. So we're very happy that they're somewhat back in business.
Yeah, and if you think about sports and recreation, city pools started to open up. So if you want to do some lap swimming, I mean, that's pretty cool for workouts and stuff. And supposedly later on, they're going to actually start allowing some team sports, like to use the city and county parks. Like you can, for baseball teams, you can start reserving the fields and the spaces for some team practices. I mean, we talk about college sports, which is starting to get back into gear when we talk to Josh Ems later, but youth sports has also just been wiped clean with nothing going down. So that's a big one. But let's start with something big, I guess, if you want to say it, is that NBA. They had said last week that there was a proposal that both sides, the players and the NBA and the owners, agreed to, which was a 22-team season restart with 8 games and then a playoff seeding and a playoffs. They were still waiting on the venue, which was the Disney Resort, the Wide World of Sports complex in Orlando, as part of Disney, to agree to it and be kind of the bubble to host everything. So they came on board. So everything looks to be set. So it really looks like now the big sports to come back, basketball is ready to roll.
And good for them. I mean, they're going to start bringing players outside of the United States market back to their home market next week, Monday on the 15th. And so just they have a plan, they have a timetable in place, and of course, it all depends on how everybody does in their testing for the COVID-19. But just to set dates of timeline that they're going to have in order to start this season, they're looking at July 31st. So, and it's been almost 3 months since no basketball, since coming out with Rudy Gobert and Donovan Mitchell being the first two NBA players to come in contact and be diagnosed with COVID-19. So it's been a while. I know there's a lot of NBA fans. I know you're a huge Lakers fan. NBA, a lot of people like to watch it. Some people say that the regular season doesn't really start for them until Christmas Day. And so there are a lot of people that have been missing basketball. This would be right around the time of the NBA Finals. And so at least there's some sort of timeline in place, which is good. It all just depends on how everybody does with their testing.
Yeah, and the bubble concept, I think obviously finding that venue was key. So I'm glad that corporations like Wide World of Sports Complex in Orlando was able. I drove by there. I traveled there 2 years ago on a spring break trip with my family. Didn't go in it, but drove by it. And obviously you get the resort area of Disney right around. So it's a great place to have done it. I think Vegas could have been another venue as well. They're opening up their casinos this past week. But I read an article again in ESPN.com, and I thought what was really good is that how well the parties, the stakeholders worked this out, and the trust and respect that the Players Union had with the Players Association led by Chris Paul, with the owners and the commissioner, Adam Silver. It seems like they were developed such a cohesive relationship through this time. Now, granted, it wasn't as if what one person said everyone agreed to, but it seemed to be very mutual conversations, and everyone seemed to be an equal partner and an equal voice in working things out. And so therefore, a sport that was almost at the end of the season and got cut, versus last week we talked about baseball that didn't really start. And if anything, I thought they were going to get going earlier, but they're having their problems and issues. But the NBA was able to kind of get all of the people's heads together, and the relationships built there, I think, is what made this happen so quickly.
And look at this. There's communication in a communications type business. And when we had been talking about this, going back to maybe episode 2 or 3, when we were trying to figure out which sport was going to be able to come back first, we kind of disagreed. Of the major sports, I had figured that basketball and hockey would be ahead of baseball, just because their season had predominantly been playing most of their season, and it would have been a little bit tough for baseball to figure out some sort of shortened season to make everybody happy and to be able to have the ability to pay players what they should have been making for this season. But kudos to the NBA, kudos to the Players Association, and give a lot of credit to Orlando, because a lot of cities, yes, you would have been the one to welcome in this type of event, but the fact that they were able to do this and have the facility, all the places for these players and their families, the officials, everybody that would be coming in with the NBA to be in their city, to be in this bubble, kudos to the city of Orlando for figuring out a way to implement this, and we'll see how it goes towards the later part of July.
Yeah, so July 31st, like you mentioned, is when they'll start. It'll go till at the latest October 12th. Now, they do have some dates after that if you're thinking, well, when does the next season start? So October 15th is when they'd have their draft. And then the season, the 2021 season, would start a little bit later. It would start December 1st. So there would be a delay, pushback there. But it seems like, I think one of the things that this pandemic kind of has put into the ears and eyes and the taste buds of the NBA people is, you talked about when the NBA season should start. There's been a good advocacy for the start of the season to be around Christmas or at Christmas, because you have those games before which are kind of meaningless. It's football going on. No one really cares. So now we're seeing next season is going to start December 1st. So pretty much a plethora of college football regular season is done. So you got the bowl seasons coming up, but the weekly college football is not going to be there. So there may be more of that push to have NBA after the 2021 season continue with maybe a December-ish start to their season.
Yeah, definitely. And you could get a lot more of exclusive dates. And if you're the NBA, you want to be able to be at the forefront of all the major sports. And if you're there by yourself for the most part in December, I mean, you'll have a couple of bowl games, like you said, towards the later part of the month of December, of course, with the NFL wrapping up their season for the most part every Saturday or Sunday in the month of December. But if you're the NBA and you can have almost exclusivity, it's something that would be a very, very big positive for them.
Yeah, so that's going to be interesting to see how the NBA kicks it into here. But it's good. It's like seeing the light at the end, like how this month has started. When you came to June, you see the light because things are going to start opening up. Now, they might be June 15th, or it might be June 16th, or it might be July 1st. But here, the NBA is giving you a date when they'll start, and it's going to happen. And you're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel that I think eases some of the anxiety for schmoes like you and me, right? Because we're like not knowing when is things going to happen, how long is this going to be. We're now at a little bit better place, I think, in terms of we're seeing things happening now that are leading toward getting back to normal, so to speak. So
things coming back. I mean, we've talked about the German Bundesliga. We talked about the KBO league in Korea with baseball. When we had Kalani Takasyan with us last week, UFC events have happened for a couple times during this pandemic. But for the sports fans, it's always been about basketball, baseball, football, some sense of soccer, but also hockey. And I think when those major sports have been talking about relative dates and timelines to set things in place to come back to play, for the most part, it's probably not going to be in front of fans. But I think once those major sports have those plan of action to be put in place, that's when the sports fans get excited.
I tell you what, I think once Bundesliga was in, they started, everything is starting to fall into place. That's just how it is. Speaking of falling into place and seeing the light, our guest is waiting in the waiting room of the Zoom waiting room. So
he's in the bullpen. Bring him in.
In the bullpen.
Coach.
We're bringing him in, Josh Elms, to connect with us, the assistant strength and conditioning coach at the University of Hawaii. And we'll see if we're all connected here. Josh, can you hear us?
Yeah, I got you. You guys hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you perfectly
Big
well.
Red.
How you guys doing?
Good, good. And thanks again for joining us. Josh Elms joining us here on the Dave and Tiff podcast, the assistant strength and conditioning coach from the University of Hawaii. Now, we were just talking, Tiff and I, about how we're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. Now, for you guys at the athletics at University of Hawaii, and particularly in strength and conditioning, you may have seen the light earlier because you knew about this date coming up in June where student athletes were going to be coming back. So give us two scenarios, if you could, Josh. How were things for you in your department prior to June 1st and the weeks leading up to that? And how have things been since last week hit?
Well, prior to June 1st, we were all working from home off campus. I think when when the NCAA designated this period as not voluntary period, but as like dead period, there's a big difference in what we were allowed to be able to do. So just a quick example, dead period, basically we're hands off. We can't communicate unless they reach out to us first. If it's a voluntary period, we can make suggestions, send out things. So basically what we've been doing since the NCAA made that decision is we've been posting our workouts for our teams online. We write 2 workouts. We write one with minimal weightlifting equipment in case they have something in their garage that they could use. And then we write one that's purely body weight or it requires something like a backpack that you can load up, things like that to get the work done. So we were pretty hands off unless they reached out to us first. Now, pretty much the period now is that we're just prepping for when football is ready to go. And so they still got to do their physicals, things like that. But we're actually, I'm in my office now. It's messy because nobody's been around for a while. But I'm in my office now, which I haven't been here for a while. Other than some just short drop-bys to make sure everything's okay with the facility, things like that. But now we're just kind of in the prepare to get the green light from admin, and once physicals are done, we're ready to roll.
So at this point, or at least since last week, Have players been stopping by? It's voluntary, you mentioned, right? They can stop in on their own,
Yes,
but you can't
they
really
have not
you can't really
been.
do anything.
Yeah, they have not been allowed to come in until everything is handled with all their physicals, and we got all those taken care of. Right now, the priority is going to be given to football athletes that are on island, that have been on island and don't have to worry about the 2-week quarantine. If they come into Honolulu, they still have to do the 2-week quarantine that the governor is mandating. And then once those guys start rolling in, they can take care of that, and then they can come in. But right now, until physicals are done, we still haven't touched any of the athletes. So hopefully, end of this week, beginning of next week, we can actually get to training and things like that.
I have a question.
Getting a little anxious here at the end of this thing.
Yeah, yeah. And here's a perfect segue, Josh. And you'll be reading my mind. Who has had more feelings of anxiety prior to this month? Has it been the coaches because they can't maintain or even check with anybody as to how their athletes are doing in the off season?
Right.
Has it been you guys, because you guys are the ones that would be the hands-on kind of during this period, but you're not able to do physically anything or see them?
Right.
Or has it been the trainers who are thinking, oh my gosh, once the players start coming, they're going to be out of shape. We're going to see all kind of injuries, elbows and things of that. We better be ready put the tents up outside because we're going to need some triage area. Which group would you say has had more anxiety?
I'd say, honestly, it's pretty even amongst everybody. Because, for us in the weight room, we're in the same boat as the athletic trainers. We want them to get in and be able to start training so that once football camp hits, we don't have a ton of soft tissue injuries and things like that we have to deal with. We want to be able to have time to train them, not necessarily so much for performance like we normally would be, but just to be able to survive camp and to survive season. Obviously, coaches want to get their guys back, and they want to be able to be doing what they love, coaching and working with their sport. So I think it's probably everybody's in the same boat, just for slightly different reasons. That one.
What's the expectation, though? Let's look at football, because they're kind of like next up, right? So obviously, you mentioned they get priority. What is the realistic expectation in terms of what are we going to actually see with these guys when they show up? I mean, are you confident that a lot of these guys have been independently doing what they're supposed to do? I mean, when I was 19 years old, I wasn't the most disciplined guy, so I might have shirked a few of my routines here and there or exercises that I have on paper. But yeah, what is the expectation?
I think it's just we're coming in open-minded. We're going to err on the side of caution, to take it real slow, see where they're at. Hope and pray that some of them at least did something, whether it was running, hiking, some kind of physical activity, to stay in some kind of shape. But I mean, realistically, gyms were closed. How many guys have stuff at their house that they're able to use is probably not a very high percentage of the group. So, I think we're expecting it to not look very pretty right off the bat. But coming in, starting out slow, I think is going to be the best approach for us.
Josh, you mentioned about football. Of course, one of the big news to begin this calendar season was the fact that they have a new coach with Todd Graham. How has he worked with you and both Tommy Heffernan to sort of put a weightlifting program together? Is it something that's completely new, or is it somewhat similar to what former Hawaii coach Nick Rolovich had?
So yeah, actually, Coach Graham is a former strength coach. That's how he got into coaching at the beginning of his career. He was a strength and conditioning coach, and then he started coaching in high school. So he has a huge emphasis in the strength and conditioning and the training. So much so that their whole staff was required to be at every lifting session and to be in the weight room and be a part of it, right? Whereas with Coach Rolo, valued the weight room the same, but he was up in his office doing things. So just kind of a different approach in that. I think Coach Graham definitely values what we do in the weight room, obviously because he was a part of it, but he's put his money where his mouth is, right? He's always brought in his own assistants and things like that to wherever he's gone. It's definitely a training culture that he has, whether it's weight room, on the field, anything. He loves training, right? And he emphasizes it. Of the handful of coaches that I've been around here, he definitely has a bigger emphasis in our off-season training than previous coaches did. Yeah.
Do you see him a lot in the weight room? Do you see other coaches in the weight room? What particular do they like to emphasize on for themselves?
Yeah. For him, it's a culture thing. It's all about he wants training and the grind and the work to be part of the team's culture, and he sees such big value in it from throughout his career, where they've emphasized it at certain places, and they've seen big changes from year to year based on their team's abilities and their team's health and things like that. So I think it's just he loves it. He likes the grind of it. He sees the value in it, and so he wants to instill that into his staff, into his athletes. And like I said, he's at every training session. He brought in Coach Cody Cook, who was with him at Arizona State previously, and he named him assistant head coach, which that assistant head coach is not a title that a strength and conditioning coach usually gets. So that just kind of shows his commitment to the training aspect for his team. Yeah.
Hey, Josh, I always, like every job I had, I always was weary about if my boss or someone higher up had the job I had. So you just mentioned that Coach Graham used to be into strength and conditioning. And I'd be like, oh no, here's the head football coach. He's going to be in our office every day, and he's going to be, really hovering over our shoulder. We're at our computer, and there's Coach Graham right there. Is one of those things that gives you like a little bit of nervousness, so to speak, that the head football coach was right in our field?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a high standard, high expectation that he wants, but for him, it seems as though it's more of he's going to handle and emphasize the culture of the team in the weight room. And as far as the sets and reps and things, that's going to be on Coach Cook, and he's going to write the program. Obviously, coaches in any sport, regardless whether it's football coach that really loves the weight room or tennis or swimming or water polo or whatever sport, the coach is going to they're going to want to have some input in the weight room, right? It's still, we're support staff. It's still their team. But like I said, he's more worried. He's going to help emphasize the culture and what he wants to see, what he wants it to look like. What the guys wear while they're in the weight room. They're all uniform. Everybody's standing in front of the coach, respectful, eye contact while the coach is talking. He's not telling us, hey, we need to do this many sets, this many reps. We need to do this exercise, things like that. For him, it's more of, obviously the training has a huge benefit, but the culture that gets revealed in the weight room also plays a huge part for him too.
Now, here's a really tough one because I know there's been a long ongoing debate going way back, and depending on what side of the fence you're on is really where you stand on this question. But you were a former pitcher with the University of Hawaii, so baseball was your game. Who's the tougher athlete, the baseball player or the football player?
I think, man, you know what? I think it depends on which position. You gotta break it down into which position you're going one-on-one with. But there's some tough guys in the trenches. There's some tough guys on the outside for the football. But I mean, the catchers are tough dudes too. So I would put a catcher on a baseball team up against just about anybody. They're pretty, as far as just pure toughness goes.
Yeah, I was going to put the catcher too, and let's take away punters and kickers and long snappers because they're just special. They're on the side over there, but you put a catcher up against a linebacker. Would that be a comparable mentality in terms of how they approach the game? Or maybe even a pitcher. You're a pitcher. That element of how they approach the game, the mental element of it, but yet there's a physical strength that has to come. Because I've always felt in baseball, it is really a one-on-one team game. It is the pitcher versus the hitter. And in terms of the pitcher-catcher versus that hitter. So there's a real mental element of it. There's an attitude element of it. Maybe you can describe that a little bit better. In terms of when you say toughness, it's not just physical, but that all-encompassing part.
Right. Yeah, I'd say if you matched up a linebacker and a baseball player, mentally they might match up, but physicality, I would probably give it to the linebacker most often.
Oh, no doubt. Hey, Josh, I know it's busy for you as heck because things are starting to get rolling and you get all the logistics out, but it's so good. It must be so good to get back in the office, isn't it?
Yeah, it's good. It's good.
Well, thanks so
enjoying
much
it.
for joining us, and we appreciate you coming on and giving us a little insight as the light on the end of the tunnel is being shown at the University of Hawaii. Thanks for joining us, Josh.
Thanks for
Thanks,
having me.
Josh.
Josh Elms, so the assistant strength and conditioning coach for the University of Hawaii, joining us here in the Dave and Tiff. And then, Tiff, maybe you can describe it, but if you haven't seen Josh in person, you would, as you can tell visually on Facebook, we're watching this video, he looks like a strength and conditioning coach. He has a beard. He looks like he get a hammer or an axe and just build a log cabin right now. He's a big guy, but he was a baseball pitcher. And so you think he's football, but he was a baseball guy. So it's kind of good to have a guy like him who physically gives you that presence as a strength and conditioning coach who was a baseball guy.
Everybody that we know at the University of Hawaii, everyone's nice. Josh is no exception to that. Comes from California, went here for a season, married Kelly Majum, now Kelly Majum Elms, one of the best hitters to ever play for the Rainbow Waihanai softball team. And coincidentally, as we talked to Josh, softball just celebrated their 10th year anniversary of going to Oklahoma City for the Women's College World Series this past weekend 10 years ago. And so maybe one of the most athletic couples to come out of UH and to live on this island. But like you said, a very nice guy, very humble, but somebody you do not want to make upset, especially in the weight room.
And what is he, like 6'4", 270?
I say he's about 6'4", 6'5", and I'm gonna go and say about 250. That's a few pounds lighter than his playing weight, just because him and his wife have a couple of keiki that they're running around trying to corral on a daily basis. But one of the most nicest people to work for the university. And if you have a chance, whatever sport that you work with, if he gets a chance to maybe be with women's basketball this year, I've got to know him a little bit with men's volleyball the last couple of years. Just very nice to talk to and nice to get to know.
And by the way, some tidbits here. If you want a good basketball podcast, why don't you listen to our buddy Brian McGinnis? He has a podcast called Court Sense, and that's all basketball related. So you get a lot of insight from him, former beat writer with the Star Advertiser covering basketball. The other thing too, since we're talking University of Hawaii, next week's Dave and Tiff podcast, which will be also not only audio only, but also on video on Facebook, is we will celebrate the 40th anniversary since the 1980 college baseball team for University of Hawaii made it to the College World Series finals, and we'll have two players, not just one, but two players. Oh, get in the screen there. Two players from that team, starting shortstop Eric Tokunaga, McKinley alumni, and also relief pitcher Sam Kakazu out of Castle. Those two will be joining us next week. We'll have them separately so we can spend more time with each of them. But that's coming up next week on the Dave and Tiff podcast. We're going to go.
And Dave, what's pretty cool though? What's pretty cool about that is when we record these on Mondays, that next episode will be airing on the 15th. And again, kudos to you for planning this out, because had sports continued, the 15th would have been day number 3 of this year's College World Series. So kudos on you to plan our guests, which happen to be celebrating their 40th anniversary of making it to Omaha.
Yeah, I was pretty nervous I wouldn't get them, so I was kind of like, oh my goodness. Hey, Tiff, before we get to Tiff's Corner, I wanted to throw a what if at you, and tell me what you think about this. Okay, we did this last week. What if? And we look back in history, and I tried to stay local, and this one popped into my head. It's football. Okay.
And this just popped in your head because, again, to our viewers out there, I have no idea where Dave's going with this.
None. Okay, so what if Bob Wagner did not become the head coach at the University of Hawaii in 1987, and he stayed until 1996? And some people say, well, they wouldn't have won the Holiday Bowl. But this was interesting. If you read his book, I don't know if you read his book, Getting the Edge, that Bob Wagner wrote after the 92 football season in which they went to the Holiday Bowl, which is considered one of the best football seasons after the Sugar Bowl of the June Jones era. But, you know, UH football had gained such a high popularity. with Dick Tomey. And then Bob Wagner takes over after Dick Tomey goes to the University of Arizona. He writes in his book that when he took over, one of the things he wanted to do was have an option offense, because he felt his key was he needed to beat BYU. And unfortunately, during the Dick Tomey era, they could not beat BYU. It built up this rivalry, but they always lost. He wanted to beat BYU. So he felt he needed to have a different offense to be able to compete with them. He couldn't go with the two-back offense. Now, keep in mind, back in the late 80s, 90s, up until maybe about 10 years ago, the running game was still pretty prominent. He wanted option. At the time in the late 80s, the only type of option offense you saw was the wishbone, which is the three running backs behind you, done by Alabama and Oklahoma, to name a few. And then also the military academies were doing the wishbone.
Mm-hmm.
And he wanted something option-oriented, but also could incorporate the passing game. The passing game was being done very heavily by BYU on Division I, and they were really visionary in terms of that offense with Lavelle Edwards and Norm Chow as the offensive coordinator. Passing wasn't, in terms of that wide open 4 or 5 receivers, wasn't being done in the Division I, except in Division I AA with Portland State and the run and shoot under Mouse Davis. So Bob Wagner brings in Paul Johnson, and he introduces the spread, which Paul Johnson was running at Georgia Southern, which is, again, 1 AA football, not Division I. That brings him an offense that no one had ever seen before, and suddenly Hawaii was able to beat teams and specifically beat BYU because it was a tough offense to defend. No one had seen it before. 2 slots, 2 receivers, 1 single back. You could run option out of it, and you could sprint out like the run and shoot and have the passing game. Now, as you move forward, Paul Johnson eventually leaves Hawaii to become head coach at Navy, institutes the spread offense there, which then becomes the staple of military academies for the Army and the Air Force to run the spread, because they're not going to have big linemen. They need option, but they go away from the 3-back option. They go to the spread. And then the spread with 4 receiver set that the spread gave you becomes a passing formation that becomes tweaked and toddled with, and that leads to what you see now when you get the rule changes of the 4 and 5 receiver sets that is so dominant in college football. You tweak it where they throw in the shotgun, and there becomes kind of the more staple offense you see now in college football. Shotgun offense, 1 back, 4 wide receivers, no tight end. So I think Bob Wagner coming to Hawaii brought that wide open spread offense to Division I college football, which then translates into the staple of military academies running it now, and which eventually leads to the shotgun 1 back 4 wide receiver set you see so common in the passing offenses of college football today. So if we didn't see Bob Wagner become the head coach at the University of Hawaii, where would the offenses be today?
Wow, that's a very good question, because wow, offenses, like you said, they have really become established, but they've more so grown, and it's a whole lot better than what it used to be back in the day, where it was 3 yards in a cloud of dust, and there were scores of 3-0, 6-3, 7-6, 9-6, 9-3, what have you. So just to have the different philosophies grow, and all these coaches that are picking up little nuances from their past mentors to sort of create their own offense based on what they've gone through. It's been fun to watch the different types of offenses that have come through college football, and to what we've seen go today. And take you mentioned Alabama earlier. Who would have thought that Alabama would have a guy like Tua Tagovailoa, or whoever would have been the quarterback, be throwing for so many yards, so many touchdowns? Because more often than not, they were a football team that it was built on defense, and you had a very good run game. And now all of a sudden, obviously now with Tua having gone to the Miami Dolphins, the fact for Alabama that they have been able to grow their offense from what it was to now scoring 35, 40, 45, 50 points a game. It's made the SEC work a whole lot differently on their defenses to try and stop this team.
Yeah. And then along the way, since Bob Wagner, you've had more prominent Division I coaches do the tweaking and the toggling. Urban Meyer incorporates the RPO element to the shotgun spread offense, brings it to Florida. Then you guys have Chip Kelly, who incorporates more of a passing attack with an athletic quarterback, a la Marcus Mariota. So, things constantly evolve. Now you're seeing it more in the NFL, the athletic quarterback, shotgun, one back, RPO being incorporated there. But hey, ESPN, they're not going to say it could trace it back to Bob Wagner, but here at Hawaii, maybe
we found it.
Kind of trace
you
it back
did
it to Bob Wagner. So hey, kudos to Bob. Hey, let's go to Tiff's Corner, because I know the corner is always the ever popular element of our podcast.
Always ever popular. We're gonna go across a couple of ponds, Dave. You know me. I'm always bringing up soccer or football in my corner. The Bundesliga. We're actually gonna go to England, to the English Premiership, and one of their teams in their top division, Brighton, came out over the weekend and said that with the EPL coming back in a couple of weeks, they have 9 regular season matches remaining. 5 of them are going to be at home. But for what this team is going to do, for $25, they're offering fans, if you wear a jersey with their colors, with their logo and whatnot, they're going to make a cardboard cutout of you, the fan, wearing their jersey, and they would put it in the stands at their home venue, the American Express Community the American Express Community Stadium.
Well, you were talking about that a couple of shows ago, about how people and marketing could be incorporated into a no-fan atmosphere. And you talked about being creative in other box. And here's one of those where, again, revenue, people can get involved, people can be seen, connected with their team. That's pretty cool.
And like you said, like we talked about, it's being a marketing department that's creative. You're thinking outside the box, and if there's going to be no fans, and the English Premiership has said that they're not going to have fans for the rest of this season, marketing departments, teams are going to have to find ways very creatively to make. You're not going to make the same amount of money as you would for a regular home match, but if you can make up a little bit of that difference, it could go a long way to keeping your company afloat.
Indeed. Awesome. Good one.
We're going to go back to the KBO, Korean Baseball Organization. And I'm not sure if you saw this on Twitter, but the Hanwha Eagles, their home stadium over the weekend, behind home plate, all of those seats behind home plates, they put stuffed animals in every single seat behind home plate. So if you are looking from the main camera angle from behind the pitcher's mound, you see the catcher, the batter, the umpire, you can see about 35, 40, maybe 45 various types of stuffed animals. Now, we've seen it where guy hits a home run, you get a smaller stuffed animal, and then if you get, a 2-run, a 3-run, or a grand slam, the size of the stuffed animal becomes larger. So I think this is another cool idea. Again, if you're not going to do cardboard cutouts, because that can get a little bit expensive, if you have excess stuffed animals or excess toys of some sort, again, keep them G-rated, fill up the stands, and you just find, again, a creative way to fill up your stands if you, in fact, cannot have a live attendance at your home venue.
And not to mention, the more creative people get at these kind of things, let's think about when the NBA starts playing, right? If they start doing different kind of things like that, that engages fans watching, right? Because you might want to watch a game and see, okay, what is going to be happening in this game as far as in the crowd? It kind of it gives you that other element to watch besides the game itself.
Again, and if you're going to be able, if you can pipe in, fan sound or something, and we've seen pictures where at that complex in Orlando for the Disney World of Sports, you're not going to have home court advantage, but they've talked about maybe issuing home courts that reflect what each team would have had at their home venue for a home playoff game. So again, finding ways to get that sense of normalcy to be a little bit more, around a little bit out there, so that it could be a little bit of having, normalcy out there.
You know, you could even have, now if they allow it, right? Think about this. Let's say you can have maybe 50 select fans actually watching. Can you imagine how in demand that would be? Because, you'd have the spacing, but let's say the NBA says, or whatever, baseball, 50 fans get to watch these games, and it's a different one. And you could make, can you imagine the contest or the lottery system or whatever you do to be able to physically watch a game? Because we take that for granted. I'll be going into the game, but if you're only limiting it to a small amount, again, supply, demand, that could be another way in which teams or leagues could incentivize and make it kind of fun and exciting connected with the game.
You do. You just hope that the fact that for like the average fan that they're able to do that, just because you don't want to have your normal fan who may not make a whole lot of money to begin with, and they're maybe able to go to a few games here and there a season. But if you're not a season ticket holder, if you don't have that excess cash flow, and again, with what's going on around the world, people are scrambling just to make rents, just to pay a medical bill, just to pay groceries, childcare. So you just don't want to have your regular fans be priced out if that type of fan allocation happens into different venues.
I'll tell you what, if UH were to do games without fans and they throw Dave and Tiff a couple of tickets and we say, it's only limited, this is only limited, so, only 100 people are going to be able to see this game. Boy, would we get a lot of followers and stuff tuning into us to try and get a ticket.
Definitely. And the final thing here in the corner, with the first-year player draft of the Major League Baseball happening Wednesday and Thursday, 1 o'clock Hawaii time on Wednesday for the first round, and then Thursday beginning at 11 a.m., rounds 2 through 5. Players are in a couple of those Hawaii players are supposed to be within the top 150. And the fact that the Major League Baseball draft is going down from 40 rounds to 5. So it's being very selective. So the fact that 2 players from Hawaii, 1 high school product and 1 University of Hawaii pitcher, is within the ESPN top 150 prospect list, pretty cool. Kalei Rosario from Waiakea, recently named the Gatorade Player of the Year, and also a relief pitcher for UH, and he's been a starter as well, Jeremy Wu Yellen. So it'd be pretty cool to see those 2 players get their names called. And again, it's going to be a different type of draft. It's going to be a different type of season, especially if they don't go straight to the pros, if they're going through the farm system, they're going through, the minor leagues. And we've seen so many teams disband their program, players not being able to make money, organizations not giving their minor league players money. But it'll be fun to watch. Hopefully those 2 players have their names called this Wednesday and this Thursday on Major League, on MLB Network, on ESPN, ESPN2. That'll be fun to watch.
Can you imagine 40 rounds of a draft? Good gosh. That is a marathon of a draft. Oh, I'm almost, I'm not a player. I'm sure more players get to be in it, so I'm sure that's the betterment of it. But in terms of being a fan, and you sure as heck couldn't make that a spectator thing, 40 rounds. Oh my.
Definitely. But again, it's pretty cool. And again, kudos to MLB. Kudos to the Major League Baseball for finding a way to still have this draft. It's going to be a lot different than what it normally is. And yes, the number of rounds are going to go down from 40 to just 5. But again, Hawaii has been notoriously one of the best states to produce baseball players. Not so much to say that they're going to make it to the big game or big show, but the fact that you're having players in a very limited rounds of draft, to have a couple of players that have their names in that pool, it's pretty cool.
Indeed it is, and it's a perfect segue as we wrap it up here, because next week, as I mentioned earlier, on our Dave and Tiff podcast, we will celebrate. You mentioned Hawaii has had some great baseball talent. one of the best, arguably the best baseball team to come out of University of Hawaii was that 1980 team that made it all the way to the finals of the College World Series. Sam Kakazu, Eric Tokunaga will be joining us next week on the Dave and Tiff podcast. We also want to thank Josh Elms, who's having a busy month finally, because now players are getting into the process of getting back on campus, getting their physical. So he's busy now. Assistant strength and conditioning coach at the University of Hawaii, joining us today. So anything else, Tiff?
It's June. It's getting hot. So it's the weather's starting to get a little ridiculous. So if you have a chance to go outside, take a walk around your street, your community, go on a hike. Be safe if you go to the beaches. They have been opening up recently. But again, just continue to practice safe social distancing, just because our state has been one of the best in terms of the limited amount of cases of COVID-19. So again, kudos to this great state for doing what they've been doing, and just stay safe. And happy early Father's Day to you, Dave. I know that's going to be in a couple of weeks, and we'll actually get to say it for real next Monday. But happy early Father's Day.
Right on. Thank you. And very well said, because now we can see the light at the end of the tunnel. The light is there, folks. And for that, we'll wrap it up. Thanks again for joining us on Dave and Tiff podcast. For Tiff Wells, Dave Kawada saying so long.